Welcome back. This is Sandy with Sandy's Organized Chaos, and today we're going to be doing this horror movies and chill popcorn bucket inspired tumbler. This is sure to intrigue any horror movie enthusiast out there. As always, I make sure to put everything I use today into the description box below so that you guys can shop those items if you would like to. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's wake up, prep these tumblers, and slay all day. Let's do this. For my base, I went ahead and I prepped and primed a 20-ounce skinny tumbler in this Real Orange by Rustoleum. I'm going to be using my glitter glue to adhere down my glitters today, so I'm going to go ahead and load up my tumbler. Now, after I have my glue applied, I'm just applying one glitter today. This is called Orange Java, and you can find that at socglitters.com if you would like to. So now I'm just going to go ahead and do up the bottom, up around the rim, and fill in the center with those glitters. After it's fully loaded up with my glitter, I'm going to go ahead and tap off any extra, and I'm going to set that off to the side to dry. Now, after my glue has dried, you want to apply about 30 milliliters of epoxy over top of your raw glitter to give us that nice smooth surface that we're going to need for our next step. So I'm going to go ahead and load this tumbler up. I'm going to go ahead and place that onto my turner. Then I will take my torch and pop any micro bubbles that might be in the epoxy. Then I will go ahead and let that cure. Now, once it has cured is the time I like to go ahead and measure it, so that way I know what size I want my stripes to be. The thickness of your tumbler might be different than mine depending on how much epoxy you have already applied or how much epoxy you didn't already apply. So that's why you want to go ahead and measure it and then go from there with the width of your stripes. Mine ended up being right at 9.5 inches across. So I could go with a 1/2 inch painter's tape if I wanted to, but I wanted to go a little bit bigger than a 1/2 inch so that way I could add a bit more of a thicker stripe along the front. So before we get our stripes going, I am going to go ahead and sand down the rim just a little bit, kind of get that going for me. And I will also come through and do the bottom up as well. The tape I am using is 3/4 of an inch, but if I wanted to do a 1/2 inch, I didn't happen to have a 1/2 inch, but if I did want to do a 1/2 inch, I would have just made myself a template on my Cricut, so that way I could have had precise measurements, so that way I could have had those bands go completely around being the same distance apart. But with this is going to cause me to have a bigger stripe in the front, which is what I wanted to begin with. So the first tape line is the most important one because each one after this will follow along with the first one that you've done. So if you don't feel comfortable with doing it by hand, give yourself a nice line from top to bottom, nice straight line from top to bottom with a ruler or whatever you need to do. So that way you know your first one will be completely straight up and down. But as you can see here, I just used my lid to kind of help me out with that. So now here I'm just going to make sure and verify that everything is nice and straight for me. Then I will go ahead and take another piece of tape and line that up right up against that first tape line that we made. Then I will take another piece of tape and line that up on the opposite side of that first tape line that I made. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take that first piece of tape that I had laid down, and I'm going to continue on that motion of laying that up against one piece of tape, applying another piece of tape, and then removing the center, creating our stripes. Now, as I continue to go along, I do periodically stop and I will prop it back up on its bottom so that way I can make sure that my lines are staying as straight as possible for myself as I go. But if you do notice after everything's all sprayed, painted, and said and done that one of your lines just seems a little bit off, it's okay because pinstriping can hide all that for you. So never worry when it comes to anything not being completely centered. So now that we made it back around to the front, there should be about 1.5 inch gap in the front that we can spray paint black along with our other stripes. So you want to leave that completely open. So I wanted a little bit of a variation with that big stripe on the front going all the way to the bottom and the littler stripes kind of stopping at a certain point. So I went ahead and I taped off along the bottom, creating that staggered look of the bigger one extending all the way to the bottom and the shorter one stopping 3/4 of an inch up. Now everything that is exposed, we're going to take outside and spray paint that black. And the next thing I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to show you guys how I did the splattering effect along the black surface after that was done. Now you can achieve the blood splatter look with acrylic paints and all that. I have a video that I did a while back that I'll attach up there for you guys, but I just like to simply use my spray paint. It's a lot simpler this way. So I get my plume going and I just release my finger very slowly until you just see it spitting and sputtering, and I just rotate that around on my tumbler and there we go. Easy peasy. And once you're done adding as much as you'd like, you're going to go ahead and let that dry as well. And once that is dried, you're going to go ahead and bring it back inside and go ahead and remove all of your painter's tape, exposing your glitter underneath. Now, before I apply another coat of epoxy, I'm going to go ahead and apply those pinstripes onto it now. On a basic white vinyl, I went ahead and I took a square shape in my Cricut design space. I unlocked my square shape and put my measurements at about 11 inches in width by 0.07 in height. And what that will do is create your stripes to be the same exact size on the inner cut and the cut that you wanted it to be. So all you have to do is cut along each side of your pinstripes, and you can utilize every single pinstripe that was cut. On the big insert of the black space that we have on the front, I'm going to go ahead and show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my pinstriping on each side of this particular stripe. After I have those pinstripings applied, I'm going to go ahead and take another little piece, and I'm going to slide my thumb over as I pull it taut to make it form that curve of the bottom there, and bring it around to the other side and simply cut it. And now that insert is nicely pinstriped. That's the great thing about these vinyls is they stretch and form very well to the curves as long as they get warmed up just a bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and simply finish pinstriping the rest of my stripes here, making sure that I cut off at the bottom because I do plan on adding a pinstripe along the bottom of those shorter stripes connecting over to the other side. So just make sure you cut them off along the bottom, and make sure that when you cut off along the top, you're not cutting it too close to the rim. So that way, if you have to do any sanding, you don't accidentally ruin your vinyl after you apply your epoxy. Then for that finishing pinstripe, I'm just going to come up along those shorter stripes, outlining it in the white vinyl as well. And she is ready to have a coating of epoxy put over top before we apply any more decals. Now, to verify that none of my pinstriping will lift when I apply my epoxy, I did give it 2 nice coats of my 2x Ultra there, so that way I know that everything will stay put and not lift on me when I apply the epoxy. So I'm going to go ahead and apply about 20 milliliters of epoxy over top of this. Hit it up really good with my torch after I get it onto my turner here, and I'm going to let that cure. Now, while that cures, let's go ahead and do up our decals. The font I got right off of Creative Fabrica, so you just want to go ahead and download your font. Then you want to go ahead and type up whatever quote you would like to be done. So I'm just going to do horror movies and chill, but obviously you can have it say anything you would like. Once you have that typed up, we're going to go ahead and make that line spacing a bit shorter, and I'm going to type in negative or minus 6.1 to bring those in closer together. Now we're going to go ahead and go up to the warp tool, and you're going to choose which direction you want it to go. So I kind of like that slanty motion of it kind of going up in one. It's like retro to me. I don't know. It kind of reminds me also of like an old Stephen King movie in a way, some of the things that he used to do in his movies. So it kind of reminded me of that too. So I just want to put it at the slant there, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that slant down to 33. Then all that is left to do is go ahead and apply your offset around it. Now you can have this be as thick as you would like. I like mine a bit tighter to my wording here. So I'm going to bring that down until everything is almost kind of has its own outline, but it's still attached just a tad. So I set mine at 0.042 if you guys want to use the exact one that I used. When I go to stack my vinyls, I am going to do the offset in a basic white, and I'm going to do the inside portion in a burgundy color that I happen to have. But when I go to stack them on top of each other, I'm going to kind of move my wording up just a little bit, so it doesn't have the offset fully around it. It's kind of off to one side. It kind of makes it kind of pop up just a little bit more to me and kind of give it more of that retro feel. So I'm going to go ahead and get my decals cut out here. I'm going to go ahead and get them stacked, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Now, when I go to apply my decal onto my tumbler, I just made sure to put the lid back on to kind of help me out with the center of where I would like everything to be. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my decal here. And our main base is pretty much done. Now, before I apply that final coating of epoxy, we're going to go ahead and do up the lid. And the reason why I like to do my lid first before I apply the final coat of epoxy onto my tumbler is so that way I can coat my lid as well when I go to coat my tumbler. So this is my fake popcorn. It's just resin popcorn. It looks so real. Everybody thought it was real when I got it in the mail, but I wanted to add some kind of drippy blood to it. So actually I did this at the same time as I did my tumbler base, and I'm just going to do the same thing where I did a plume with my spray paint and let go of the nozzle until I just got the speckles, and I'm gonna go ahead and spray up some of my popcorn as well to match my base. Now, after my popcorn has dried, we are ready to go ahead and remove the slider off of the lid that will be on our tumbler. I just use a screwdriver and very carefully pry it up from underneath and pop it right off. I know a lot of people try to do the removable ones and all that stuff, or they try to keep the slider attached, but if I'm doing a topper, I want the whole thing just kind of covered in it, and that's all I'm going to be using it for. And I feel like if you want to, you could offer an extra lid to whoever you're giving this to or selling it to, and you can do it that way, but I just prefer to go ahead and do everything right on the lid itself. But that is my personal preference, and whatever you guys feel it should be is exactly how it should be. Okay, moving along, I'm going to go ahead and rough up the surface of my lid here. I'm using a 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to rough up all the areas that I know epoxy will be touching. Then I'll just come through and clean up all the debris with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on a paper towel, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. And when decorating your lid, you want to always make sure to keep your mouthpiece away from you. That's going to make you remember to focus on the front side of the lid there, because that's the part that will be the most visible whenever somebody's drinking out of it. And to get our popcorn attached down quickly, we're going to be using this Resin Rockers UV resin. Now, I wanted my UV resin to look a little bit more not buttery, but like kind of gory to go along with the theme that we have going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and put some drops of a red alcohol ink right into the UV resin and stir that up really good. Now, I believe if you go onto their website, I think they already have pre-colored UV resin now, which they didn't have at the time when I purchased my resin. So, you know, you could either buy it pre-colored or you can color it yourself, completely up to you. And I wanted to add just a little bit more, so I found these decorative fillers. It's stuff that you can put in like plants and stuff, and they're just little skulls, and they do glow in the dark, so it kind of adds to all of it as well. So I'm just going to take out about 3 of those and put those in with my popcorn, and I didn't know if I was going to use them or not, but I ended up using them. So it's always fun to kind of add little details like that, and especially something like this, because it's very whimsical. You could add little spiders, anything you'd like into this, little eyeballs I seen that you can get on Amazon. So just you know, have fun and think outside the box. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tinted UV resin here, and I'm going to go ahead and line the inside, or the lid, there we go, the top portion of my lid that I sanded. I'm going to do along the top there and down into the divot where the slider was as well. For those of you that have never worked with UV resin, it's only going to be activated and cured once a UV light hits it, so you have plenty of time to kind of work with it and do what you need to. So now I'm going to go ahead and take some popcorn that I didn't spray paint as filler along the bottom to kind of get everything nice and stacked for me. And then I'm going to go ahead and come through and start stacking in my little pieces here. So here on the main bottom here, I did add 2 of those little skulls. So I kind of laid one on its side right there at the front. And then I did another one on the other side where I had it standing up. And then I just kind of put my popcorn in between just until, you know, it's almost like playing, not Jenga, but Tetris. There we go. It's almost like playing Tetris, because if you flip these little pieces of popcorn a certain way, you can almost get them to kind of really fit like a puzzle piece together as you go. So I'm happy with how that turned out. Now I'm going to go ahead and activate my UV resin and get these pieces cured down to the main base. I let that sit for about 60 seconds, and now we're good to go. We're ready to start stacking some more pieces. And another reason why I went ahead and took the slider off is because pretty much by the time I'm done, you're not really going to be able to sip it like with your mouth. You know what I mean? So by the time it's done, there's a lot going on, and if you were to tip that up to your mouth, you know, all that stuff would be in your face. So this is pretty much straw only after it's said and done. So this is all pretty much in your preference on how high you want to go with your popcorn and everything that you're doing. You know, how much do you want to do? It's pretty much up to you after this point, because from here on out, all I'm going to do is continue to drizzle on my tinted UV resin and stack my popcorn pieces until I feel like it looks like it could match with the tumbler itself. So I didn't want to do not too much, because if I would only done like 1 row of popcorn, it wouldn't have looked right. You know what I mean? I wanted to kind of have it a little bit more bolder and bigger. So I kind of stacked mine, I think about 3 or 4 kernels high is pretty much what I ended up doing. I even added another skull to the top and UV resined a piece of popcorn to the top of his head and all that stuff. So again, this is all just personal preference on how big you want to go. So after you get everything all stacked up about how you would like it, you want to make sure that it is completely cured. The UV resin is completely cured. There we go. So what I do is I'll set it with my flashlight and then I'll go set it out in the sun to finish curing. But this is pretty much how I finished up mine. Now the next thing I like to do is I like to go ahead and add a bit of UV resin to fill in some of the cracks for myself. So that way water doesn't get stuck down in there if somebody were to go and wash it. So this is just going to help out when I go to coat it with my regular epoxy. So I'll just take a bit of my UV resin, I'll take a brush that I don't care about, and I'll kind of sweep that UV resin around and fill in any big holes, cure that with my UV light, and then we'll be ready to apply our epoxy. So as you begin the process of giving your tumbler its final coats of epoxy, you just want to go ahead and take any leftover epoxy and again, take another brush that you don't really care about, and you're going to go ahead and delicately paint it with your leftover epoxy all over. This is just really going to ensure that everything we've done to it so far, the painting and all that stuff, is going to last a very long time, especially some of those popcorn kernels that might be kind of hanging off just a little bit. It's really going to add a bit more structure to your piece, making it last a lot longer. The key to this to make sure that nothing drips down is we are using a fast curing epoxy, and we are also doing very thin coats. So nothing should drip off as long as you're doing pretty thin coats. Now, when you go to do the very last coat of epoxy on your tumbler, if you need to, you can go ahead and apply another thin layer of epoxy over your lid as well. And after that has cured, it will be ready to proudly display at your next Halloween party. Whether you take this design and duplicate it as is, or you take it and let it inspire you to create something that is completely your own, I hope that you guys had a lot of fun watching this tutorial today. Again, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.